this is all old news to you. Okay, so we have this concave surface in the convex proximal row, and so the bones are going to move in the opposite direction of the osteokinematics. Why that is important is the second row won't behave that way, and so we can identify if we're in the first or second row. So when we extend the wrist, that proximal row of carpals are going to go down and disappear on us, and if we flex our wrist, that proximal row of carpals is going to pop out at us. Okay? Now, the first one we want to find is the scaphoid. So if you turn your hand so that your thumb up, and you actually lift up your thumb, you get the anatomical snuff box. Okay, have you talked about that? And the tendons on either side of it. The carpal bone that's inside that anatomical snuff box is the scaphoid. So you'll know that you're on the scaphoid because if you radially deviate, so if you move towards your thumb, it's going to disappear, and if you ulnarly deviate, it's going to pop out at you. Okay, that's how you know you're on the scaphoid. The scaphoid is a very commonly fractured bone, and typically with a fallen outstretched hand is a scaphoid fracture. Okay? Whooshy. The next bone is the trapezium, and the trapezium is going to be between the first metacarpal and the scaphoid. So what you want to do is, so if we look at the thumb, we have 2 phalanges, right, instead of 3. And then below that proximal phalanx, we're going to be on the metacarpal. So all the metacarpals are going to be in the palm of our hand. Okay? So if we follow that first metacarpal down, you will feel the base of the first phalanx. And if you go down a bit further, you're going to be on the trapezium. Now you'll know that you're on the trapezium and not the scaphoid because if you do that ulnar and radial deviation test, it should not disappear. And if you go down just a little bit more proximal, then you should be back on the scaphoid again. Okay? So for me, it's easiest to come down off of that metacarpal. You'll feel the base of that first metacarpal, and then you're on the trapezium. And then if you do that ulnar and radial deviation, it won't disappear. It just feels continuous. Whereas if you go down a little bit more proximal, now you're on the scaphoid, and now it disappears when you radially and ulnarly deviate. Okay? So I would always start with this row. The trapezoid is going to be just off your second ray. Nothing interesting ever happens to the trapezoid. So you will not ever need to palpate the trapezoid. Just know that it comes off that second ray. Okay? Now the lunate is going to be, actually I have that drawn wrong. The lunate is going to be right off Lister's tubercle. And that is going to be the center bone of that proximal row of carpals. And so if you flex your wrist, so if you take your wrist down, it's the bone that pops out. And when you extend your wrist, it disappears. And it's just off of your distal radius and ulna. If you move distally, you're going to end up on the capitate, which is the largest carpal of your hand, which is also going to be in line with your third ray. Most of us have a bump on the dorsal side of your hand, and that's going to be your capitate. We're going to be using capitate as a landmark for some of our wrist goniometry. Okay? Again, the capitate will not move when you flex or extend, but if you're on the lunate, it will disappear and be prominent when you flex and extend your wrist. Okay? So those are going to be in line with your third ray. Over here, we have the triquetrum, which actually I have fractured in a motorcycle accident, and then your pisiform. So for the pisiform, you're going to have a wrist crease. If you put the crease of your other hand, of the IP joint, on your wrist crease and go in towards your palm, and you start to press down, you will feel a stone P. Okay, it'll be round, and that's your pisiform sitting on top of your triquetrum. Okay, so you're going in at about a 45-degree angle from your wrist with your thumb, and you're gonna hit that bone. Okay? Now, our hamate is a large carpal in the distal row that comes off your fourth and fifth rays. It spans both of them, okay? And what's interesting on that one is your hook of the hamate, okay? And that's part of your tunnel of Guyon, so your ulnar nerve goes through there. Probably aren't calling it the tunnel of Guyon anymore, you're probably calling it, I don't know, some kind of tunnel. Do you know what you're calling it?
Tunnel of Guyon, I think.
You're calling it the tunnel of Guyon?
I think so.
Do you know what the other name is?
I mean,
What did Pedo call it?
is this distinct from the ulnar tunnel?
I don't think it's called that, I think it's
Cause I've repeatedly seen reference to the ulnar tunnel.
the ulnar tunnel, okay,
but I don't
maybe it's
know
that
if
easy.
that's separate or not.
The hook of the hamate is going to be on the palmar side of the hamate, and it's going to be distal to the pisiform, okay? And it's a rigid, so your pisiform is a sesamoid bone that's part of your flexor carpi ulnaris. So this is our first sesamoid bone that we've covered. Have you talked about sesamoid bones in anatomy? So it serves as a pulley, increases the leverage of the muscle, mechanical advantage of the muscle. So that's the pisiform. The hamate, and if you get on the pisiform, you can move it around a bit, okay? The hook of the hamate is a structure of the hamate bone, and so there's no moving it around. If you press hard enough on it and a little bit proximal, you can actually cause your digits 4 and 5 to go numb. So similar to pressing on the ulnar nerve in the elbow, you can cause your fingers to go numb. So people who ride bicycles and they have their fingers go numb, it's normally because there's pressure on the tunnel of Guyon. Okay? All right. And that's all of the bones of the hand. See how easy it is? So again, for the metacarpals, the base is always going to be proximal, the head is always going to be distal. For digits 2 through 5, you're going to have a proximal, middle, and distal phalanx. They're the same orientation, okay? So base is proximal, head is distal, connecting to the base of the next phalanx, going to the head, and then the base of the next one, attaching distal, okay? So let's go ahead and have you palpate